All right, friends. You all can hear me, yes? We are really so glad and delighted that you are with us tonight to share in our second kind of round of having this poetry in the pandemic. We are really excited to be able to offer this space and time to hear from, oh boy. Let's see. Here we go. And so it's my opportunity and joy to introduce Christie Hill, who will be moderating our time together. Christie is a native of San Diego and graduated from Berkeley with a degree in social welfare, and then went on to law school at Columbia University, and is my wonderful wife, who is all things wonderful and all things everything. She is the Deputy Director of Policy at the ACLU here in San Diego, and will be taking this space and time to lead us in this conversation with Francis Foster and Alexis Jackson. And so I serve as the pastor of Christian Fellowship Congregational Church, and it is my joy to be able to be in this space with you and share in this time. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you at the end. Christie?
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Hill. I am very excited to be here this evening with you all virtually and to be in space again with Francis and Alexis. Francis and Alexis are going to share poems that they have been reflecting on and looking to during these crazy times. And there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions in the chat that will be sent to Lee and I, and we will pose those. So feel free to send questions via chat for us to respond to and ask our speakers. And then after they've shared a few poems and we've answered some questions, Alexis will share a prompt that you can consider for your own writing after this. So a little bit about our speakers. Alexis earned her Master's in Fine Arts from Columbia University, as well as her BA in English from Messiah College. While at Messiah College, she studied post-colonial literature, poetry, and Shakespeare in Oxford University. Her first book, My Sister's Country, is a second place winner of Core Press Institute's 2020 First Book Prize. Her manuscript explores the connectedness of holy texts and the words of Black women. In her work, June Jordan is placed in conversation with Missy Elliott, Hortense Spillers, and the women in Jackson's own matrilineal lineage. She was influenced by several folks, and her work makes use of found text, explores the concept of planar time, Black women's omnipresence, and is heavily influenced by her identities as a 90s raised, darker skinned Black woman and Philadelphia native. Alexis teaches poetry, literature, and writing at the University of San Diego, and she's also taught at Messiah College. Dr. Francis Foster is a retired university professor. Her one and only published poem was printed in 1959 in her high school manuscript. She decided she was better at teaching about poems than writing them, and for 40 years has talked about poetry to hundreds, maybe thousands of students. She has written or published over a dozen books and too many articles to count. Many, if not most of them, dealing with poems, poets, and the people they impact. So we are very excited again to have Dr. Frances Foster and Alexis with us. So we will jump right into it and begin with Frances to share her first selection.
And came back. I am happy because it gives me a chance to double back and start over again. Two interesting things came out of last week's experiment. And one is that, well, three maybe, because I'd heard about Zoom bombing, but I'd never been bombed. So now I have that done. I don't have to do it again. And the other was that I might not have known that my 8-year-old granddaughter is a poet. And so because she's tuned in last time, she called and we had a long conversation and she shared some poetry she'd written. So it's an ill wind that blows no good, I guess. But the one thing that disturbed me last time was I heard this conversation referred to as a poetry class. And I think I'm partly to blame because I started out by reading a poem and then telling you why I didn't like that poem as much as I thought I had. So I thought I would reverse, start over again, and be a little more vulnerable, telling you this time about poems that I actually like. And one is a poem that for some reason is like an earworm. Little pieces of it come into my head at any given time, and they help me get up out of bed in the morning, and they help me smile when I don't feel like it, and they help explain some things for me, which is what I like poetry to do. And that is actually the poem that I never learned by heart. I forget pieces, but other pieces pop up. It's Ecclesiastes 3, and I like the King James Version, just like Ann John's mother, Barbara, like the King James Version for the poetry of it. It's on your screen and it says, "To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace." And pieces of it stick in my head, mostly the first part, "To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven." But when I read it again recently and decided to read it all the way through, I was struck by a time to embrace and a time to keep from embracing, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to keep and a time to cast away. Being quarantined and sequestered and all, I find myself going through things, trying to throw them away, saying goodbye to them, and also getting on the internet and buying more things. And so that's just one way in which this poem helps me rationalize some of my very strange behavior. I don't have a nice transition to go to Alexis. I'll just say that's my beginning. Think about it. Tell me what you think. Alexis?
Okay, hi. Sorry, I was muted. I didn't know. Can we have conversation or do I have to go? Wait, we can talk?
Yeah, you can definitely have conversation.
Oh,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure. Yeah, I thank you for bringing this particular scripture to my attention right now. What you said exactly, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Um, Reading it during this time, of course, that has a different gravity to it, a different weight to it. But there's also the truth, as you were saying, that we often turn to the earworms, or the earworms come up in times when we need them. I was reading in preparation for this an article in Vanity Fair where they interviewed Ross Gay, and that's exactly what he was saying. Poems circulate at times when we need them, right? And much of the Bible, we know, is poetry. We have Psalms, we have all of these beautifully written verses, and I think this is one. I mean, all of us have our favorite scripture in our heads, or our favorite song, or our favorite. And when you're experiencing certain things, they come up. And so I think that this came to you at this time, and that you're sharing it with us is beautiful and hopeful. Because I'm familiar with the scripture, but I never would have rethought about what it meant to embrace at a time, and then to refrain from embracing at a time. And that's even in scripture, right? That word from the Lord is actually there. Because I've been troubled as well during this time, and trying to figure out where to go. And for me, it's been Psalm 23. Just because of all that is up in the air for me working in academia. It's been okay. You gotta chill. You gotta not have a panic attack. But no, I think this is beautiful, and a beautiful reminder that everything has its season. And I think I find great peace in reading this with you. So thank you for bringing our attention to this.
Yeah, I think what we sometimes forget is that poems are everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're part of our lives, and they're part of our belief system. And to think about Ecclesiastes or the Psalms, which are songs, which are poems, it's a combination of context. It brings you back to certain kinds of situations, and connect you longitudinally, that is, to the past. I mean, way back then, there was a emotion, a time, a need for somebody to articulate this answer or possible way of thinking about why is this place so crazy. And so you have this longitudinal, I'm connected in time to poems and thoughts and experiences that I share way back before the literacy was something that we could hone in on. To think about, I don't like to call it scripture even, because that makes it sound like it's a to-do list or something. I like to think of them as poems, and think about the repetition and the oppositions and the ways in which that thing comes together and comes up in my little head at the most opportune times. So yeah, that's one of my favorite things right now.
It's so funny you say that, because I have the same feeling. I think it just, instead of me wanting to call it poetry, I think I call poetry scripture. So I do that too, right? I'm like, I'm turning to these poems for that same comfort, if you will, those same set of eyes that I don't, or might not necessarily be using, that, as you said, we're connected to in the past and present as well. I'm thinking of.
Have you read Jericho Brown's New Testament?
No, it's on my to read list. But
neither have I. But shout out to Jericho, because he won the Pulitzer Prize this year. He won a prize for the New Testament too. But that whole exercise is a way in which he is trying to to interact with the Bible, because he comes from, as I do, a Christian background.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of them is called Psalm 150.
Mhm.
And what he does with it shocked me at first. And I wanted to go, no, you don't. Now I'm looking at it again and again. And I think the guy has got something to say. So in your spare time, check out the newest Pulitzer Prize winning poet, who's Jericho Brown from Emory University. Why don't you read, Alexis?
Well, thank you both, and we'll go on to the next piece. And I think this poem, the line that stood out to me, I mean, the scripture, a poem that we've all read numerous times, but a time to sow, like hit differently, right? Thinking about all the folks making masks during this time.
Yeah.
So thank you. Next poem, Lee.
Is it my turn or am I going to?
I believe this is you, Francis.
Oh, it's me?
Isn't
That's the one that I didn't want to do.
okay.
Time
Then
I
we
started
will.
out and showed you that, and then I said, and here's why it's cotton candy. And that's
Okay.
why I think somebody said that this was a poetry class and not a conversation. So get rid of Kitty. She
Okay, then we will move right along to the next one. I believe that is Alexis.
Okay. Here we are. Hello, everyone. This poem, and we had the perfect segue into it, right? This poem, Lucille Clifton said in an interview, couldn't even tell you which interview, that poets come to poetry not out of what they know, but out of what they wonder. And I think what we've noticed, especially during times like this, but also as Reverend Dr. J. Lee Hill was saying before, when we were having a private conversation in preparation for this, that folks often turn to poetry, when someone passes, in times of celebration. And so I think oftentimes when we need a poem or we need to see ourselves in a new way, or we need to feel comforted, we look to the wanderers, right? We look to those who are constantly wondering on things and also have a command of this art form with language that can communicate exactly what it is we're feeling or that we need to hear. And so for me, this untitled poem by James Baldwin is one of them. I'll read it. Lord, when you see the rain, think about it, please, a little. Do not get carried away by the sound of falling water, the marvelous light on the falling water. I am beneath that water. It falls with great force, and the light blinds me to the light. So just talking about what I love about it, the way the line breaks work to me, right? You heard it a little bit, hopefully, in the music of the way I read it. Where there's if we look at that penultimate stanza, I break and beneath that water, right? So there's that pause there where it's to think about the individual, to think about the person speaking, being separate from all the other things that are happening. And we get that visually with the poem as well, right? Everything standing on to the left margin is that individual. And then everything else that's going on in these stanzas is what's happening, right? In the world, in what other people are saying on the news, and even perhaps in the way that the speaker sees God seeing the world. And so I find comfort in, well, not comfort, I turn to this poem because it definitely feels pertinent for me at this time. Not questioning, why this God, why now? It's like, no, I understand that you have your reasons and not really concerned with those. I know that you love me. I believe that you love me. So my question is, please don't forget about me. And also in the beauty that comes out of, which I think some of us have seen and hopefully appreciated in some ways, depending on, of course, our privilege, but there's some beauty that is occurring now, right? Perhaps people are spending more time getting to know one another in shelter. Perhaps people are reading books they've always wanted to read. Perhaps we are listening to music that we haven't really listened to before, or as Francis said, those earworms are popping up, and we're enjoying things that we don't remember, enjoying or remembering things that we don't remember to remember as often as we would like to. So even with the marvelous light of the falling water, the great force beneath the water and the light, like there's a lot of light in this poem. But Baldwin is saying, I am beneath all of this. When all this storm is happening, all the beauty that occurs when we see the lightning and the flashes and all that even comes afterward, will I still be standing? Don't forget about me. Which of course then makes me think of Pass Me Not, which is one of my favorite hymns. But yeah, I enjoyed this poem for its formal choices also, I should say, because this will be related to your prompt. It's an almost sonnet, which is like a really poety geeky thing I'm gonna say, but it's 15 lines, not 14, right? And that also lends itself to the formal structure where there's the me outside of everything else that's happening. So we get the perfection of the 14, and then it's like, yeah, but I am just the line that's outside of it. Me to the light is literally that line that would make it imperfect. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that poem. That's why I love it. I don't really have much else to say. Francis, what do you think about it? Or any like comments for me?
Well, two things briefly, because I like the relationship that the speaker has with God.
Mm-hmm.
The speaker realizes subordinates and sovereignty, but also feels a relationship where the speaker can say what is being thought.
Yeah.
And I also like the light, because when I read, the part that really got to me is people often say, I see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm.
And with the pandemic, sequestering, and all of these new words that we're learning, we're always, when are we getting out of here? When I think it's coming, I think it's coming. Today's Thursday. He's supposed to have announced the stuff, and maybe tomorrow we can go to a restaurant or something. But when we're in a storm, and even as we're marveling at it, when the force of that storm, the force of it can blind us to the light, the other light. And that's true. If you shine the light in your eyes, then you can't see what else is there. And so playing around with, it falls with great force, and the light blinds me to the light, reminds that we have to be able to see the macro and the micro. And sometimes what we see up close is so full that we can't quite see the other parts that we need. And that's true. There have been some amazing moments and experiences during this enforced solitude or careful letting out. I've never seen a neighborhood that was so like Mr. Rogers as the one I'm living in right now, with families walking at night and little kids riding their tricycles and all of that kind of thing, and no cars running up and down. There are some really good moments. So that's my thought. I won't go on.
Yeah, I do just want to say, only because my mom is here, Francis told me to call her Francis. I was going to put that out there. That was a request. Okay, I'm sorry, Christie, you were gonna say.
No, just that I think, following up on what you both were saying, that the light, even with the rain, is always present. And so even in the stanzas, the light is present, the word light is present there. And in the first one, maybe the light is represented by the Lord. And so that God is always present, even when we're in the storm. So thank you for this poem as well. Shall we go to the next one?
Can I do the two at the together and then? Yes.
Perfect.
They seem to go together. These are two that I found in the last couple of weeks after the Reverend reminded me that that poetry exists and I should be looking at it rather than just looking at the little earworms that come in. Lynn Unger wrote that poem, Pandemic, that was making it all over the Facebook and all. You know, the one that starts, what if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath the most sacred of times, cease from travel, cease from buying and selling, give up. And she goes into all of these things that we can make of this solitude. And it is another one of those viral things. But I looked up Lynn Unger and I discovered I like this other Lynn Unger. I like On the Other Side. Through the looking glass, down the rabbit hole, into the wardrobe and out into the enchanted forest where animals talk and danger lurks and nothing works quite the way it did before, you have fallen into a new story. It is possible that you are much bigger or smaller than you thought. It is possible to drown in the ocean of your own tears. It is possible that mysterious friends have armed you with magical weapons you don't yet understand, but which you will need to save your own life and the world. Everything here is foreign. Nothing quite makes sense. That's how it works. Do not confuse the beginning of the story with the end. And let me read the next one because I like the beginning and end and old and new. And then I can tell you, if it's not clear, why I chose those two. Or Tracy Smith is or was the poet laureate of the US. And Tracy's another young, smart, wonderful gift to us all. But this one is called An Old Story. So Lynn Unger says, do not confuse the beginning of the story with the end. Tracy talks about the old story. We were made to understand it would be terrible. Every small want, every niggling urge, every hate swollen to a kind of epic wind, livid the land and ravaged like a wageful dream. The worst in us having taken over and broken the rest utterly down. A long age passed, when at last we knew how little would survive us, how little we had mended or built that was not now lost. Something large and old awoke. And then our singing brought on a different manner of weather. Then animals long believed gone crept down from trees. We took new stock of one another. We wept to be reminded of such color. And I didn't read one and then read the other in real life, but I was struck by the way that Lynn took some of my favorite stories, our fantasy stories, the stories that tell us what could be, or what they take old stories and retell them in ways through the Looking Glass and the Narina series and all of that. I like the way she played with my childhood fairy tales in order to show me something about what was going on here, something about on the other side, no longer looking for the light at the end of the tunnel. But when we get through this, we will know more about, I will know more about me. And I might find that I am bigger than I thought, and I might find that I am smaller than I thought. And I will have, as all of us are, gone through all kinds of hills and valleys and emotions, struggling always to keep a smile and to think we will get to the other side. But sometimes you drown in your own tears. Just give it up, you know. Nothing makes sense. But I have to remember what she says at the end. That's how it works. Do not confuse the beginning of the story with the end. And then Tracy comes along and talks about what seems to be, for me, whenever I watch the news, the politics of the day, the dynamics of the day, all of this kind of hate swollen to a kind of epic win, which we're made to understand and we knew would be terrible. If so-and-so wins the election, you know everything's going to hell in a basket. And sure enough, it looks like it. And you think it's been so long, and all the things that you worked for, all the things that you thought you had built, sometimes you find out that they're not. And then once you realize that, the transience, the inabilities and the abilities to make changes that are large and sometimes small, then we're freed up to do another manner of weather like with the rain in the Baldwin poem. And then we can move back again into beliefs that were real, that are old and lasting. Then animals long believed gone crept down from trees. And I think about all those pictures of these wild animals coming out into the street or whatever. We took new stock of one another. This experience gives us a way of thinking about ourselves and our relationships with others, our neighbors, our friends. And it's so beautiful that we can cry because we're reminded of how really intense and how vibrant and how exciting life can be. So that's my thing, my testimony, my offering.
Thank you, Frances. Alexis, any thoughts on what Frances shared?
Oh, that's a lot. We did 2 poems. An Old Story is one that I was happy to see again, because I've read all of Tracy K. Smith's work. What strikes me, and I'm a nerd when it comes to line breaks, a long age pass. How that, I mean, there's of course that turn in the poem, right? Before we were made to believe that the worst was going to happen. And they're preparing for it, the speaker included. And then a long period of time passed. Whether or not the actual, whether or not it's as terrible as we think they thought it would be, we don't know. But we know that they were made to believe it would be terrible. And there's a long age that passed, which to me also marks that a lot of them, the we in the poem, survived it, right? Lived through it. Perhaps more little people were made to and brought into the world during this long age. And so there's also life within the white space there, within the what's not being said. A long age passed after the worst in us having taken over and broken the rest utterly down. We're made to believe that's all going to happen, but a long age passes. And then when we thought it was over, I'm just summarizing how I read that last part, we see little marks of life. We see and are reminded that some of us did survive this. And we see the beauty in that. And then we and our singing, sorry, I saw that part. And that goes to what we were saying earlier, a little bit about scripture, right? Not just being scripture, poems as well, and songs also being kinds of poems. And what does that mean when people together recognize something? What kind of song is that when we all get together and see something together in the same way? And how we weep because we're reminded that within all of this that we saw during the long age and what we believed would be horrible during the long age, that we still see color at the end of all this. There's still multiple types of, it's not just black and white. I think that's what the color is made for us to think about, right? It was going to be horrible or it was going to be good. And we just knew it was going to be horrible. And it's like, no, a lot of us survived it and we all have stories. And now we see the animals we thought that were gone. and the joy that we thought was gone as well is back. So I think you've invited me to be more encouraged by this poem than I would have been otherwise, I think. But it really is, for me, it's that line break in the center, the right margin with a long age pass. Yeah, I don't have any other thoughts.
What does the title mean to y'all? An old story.
Something large and old awoke. I think an old story is, I go back to Ecclesiastes for one thing. I mean, when was there a time that you had not learned certain poems from the Bible, certain stories from the Bible? And then there are times when we come back and that which we needed or need is right there. It's an old story. It's a story of resurrection. It's a story of a time and a place for everything, a season for everything. We go through this bad and we see what seems to be the fruits of our labors, the Civil Rights Act and the, all kinds of stuff seems to have just been, don't even get me started. But then at that point, something large and old awakes because it's not gone. And it's that old story.
Yeah, I think.
Or you could ask Tracy, I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, it makes me think of sitting at the feet. This is, a little dramatic, but sitting at the feet of an elder, it just called an old story, right? And then being told the story. And also thinking of my childhood, likewise, being in church or going to the library or hearing stories about things that my grandparents experienced, right? A story doesn't always mean that it's true, right? We also have fables. So, but we often remember them when we experience things in life that are similar, and we're invited to find ourselves in this story. And especially when it's old, right? It's an old story, meaning, I think, pointing to Ecclesiastes, all these other things, that other people have heard this story. Many generations have heard this story. So it also makes me think of there's nothing new under the sun as well. An old story, we're retelling the story. And also you'll be able to find yourself in this story. And this story will continue to repeat. And for generations, others will find themselves needing this story or seeing themselves in this story. That's what I think.
Thank you. Can we go back to the poem right before this, Lee, before we move on to the next one? So
you're in charge.
You mentioned, Francis, in this one, like the idea of being small and how that had struck you. And when you were reading it, I was like also thinking about how the pandemic has shown that both, like small and big, right? So like one person can have a really big impact in terms of spreading COVID. And we've seen it being traced back, hundreds of cases to one person deciding to go out. And so that small decision to go outside has a big impact. And then on the flip side, that all of these plans that we had, vacations that might have been planned, work deadlines, came to a halt, right? When we were told to stay home. And so that both things are existing right now. And so that kind of stood out for me as I was listening to you read it. Alexis, were there any thoughts that you wanted to offer about this piece?
Okay, I can just talk about what stuck out to me. Of course, do not confuse the beginning of the story with the end, like absolutely. But going along with the idea of being small, and of course thinking about the Looking Glass and Alice in Wonderland and Narnia and all of that, where it says the second, or I guess the bottom third, it is possible that mysterious friends have armed you with magical weapons you don't yet understand, but which you will need to save your own life and the world. everything here is foreign. Nothing quite makes sense. That's how it works. Of course, I mean, for me, it as a writer, as a poet, it's exactly what this kind of feels like. Nothing makes sense. All of this is foreign for me. I know that we've had other pandemics in the world that were, to this gravity where people stayed home or were encouraged to change their entire lifestyles. But I've lived during, I guess, swine flu, H1N1, but none of that. I still went to school. My parents still, went to work. So that portion of it, but along with, I'm thinking of the earworms again. Thinking of my mother, my family, the things I've heard, my spouse. It's possible that mysterious friends have armed you with magical weapons you don't yet understand, but which you will need to save your own life in the world. If you think about whatever work you're doing as significant, right? Whether it's, of course, those on the front lines, but also us who are writing, us who are helping to do our part as best we can, raising children, loving people, thinking of what it is that pushes us to continue. And oftentimes it is song, there are sayings, right? There's poetry. That being what we get from mysterious friends with these magical weapons that we don't yet understand, right? We don't think of them as weapons against COVID. We don't think of Netflix sometimes, I think, which it definitely is, but as weapons against COVID. But I think, poetry, our meeting together right now in this space, I think you all are a part of the mysterious friends that have armed me with magical weapons, right? This space we have to discuss poetry and to feel less alone right now, to know that others are even thinking about poetry right now. I think for me, that portion of this also took me back to my childhood and the mystical nature of a lot of the fables. But I think that part stuck out to me for that reason.
Any last thoughts on this poem, Francis? Okay, let's move to the next.
Alexis.
It's me? Oh, it's me. Okay. Yeah, we got Lucille Clifton's Sunday Dinner. This is honestly the first poem that popped into my mind when we were discussing doing something like this. I have been reading this poem at least twice a week, which I know might sound crazy. So I'll read it and then talk about why. But I just find a lot of comfort in this poem right now. It brings a lot of memories to where I am presently, but also encourages me to let me know that I can still do something right now to comfort myself and my husband. So we have Sunday Dinner by Lucille Clifton. One once in a fantastic time, the certainty of chicken popping in grease, the truth of potatoes, steaming the panes, and butter, gold and predictable as heroes in history, melting over all. So we all know we're not supposed to eat fried chicken every day. That's not good. But the idea and the tradition of Sunday dinner being something that we find comfort in, my godmother actually still hosts it with her immediate family, but that there's some sense of normalcy still, right? And then there's some sense of connection to the past and the future, I believe as well, in cooking. In preparing food for those you love and taking and speaking with them. I know a lot of people who take time on different days to FaceTime their family and eat a meal together. So the comfort that comes with smelling food, honestly, smelling and that we can still do that. I can still do that. I can decide I'm going to make fried fish and grits and whether I order it off of Target and then have to run to Whole Foods to get the fish, or I buy it frozen and have it stockpiled in the freezer. There is something about a meal, specifically, of course, Sunday dinner here as the poem is asking, but I'm just speaking of sharing a meal with the people you love. And even if you can't do that with them, doing it by yourself and the way you can feel connected, and we are connected, I think, with food and recipes and the taste and all that comes with that, right? Even if it's not good, I think sometimes I'm like, oh, this don't taste like my dad used to make it. I got to do something different. But I think there is the certainty. It says the certainty of chicken popping in grease, right? Looking forward, of course, prior to anything crazy happening. When something in life was going wrong, even if you were the one cooking it, the idea that you knew that there was certainty that on Sunday there was going to be dinner. You might have lost your job. You might not have done well at work. Might be failing a class at school. Might not have lost the weight you wanted to lose. But no matter what, on Sunday you're going to be doing this thing. And for me, that is true. That's what I'm taking comfort in right now. Is that my husband and I share meals on Saturday mornings. And we make French toast and we talk, and it's beautiful to me. And it's what I need right now, especially because I have anxious tendencies. I can get anxious if there's no real schedule, and there's not one right now at all. Working from home is very, very difficult for me because I feel like I need to be, mopping or doing something else. And so the idea that there is certainty in some way, shape, or form that I can say I'm going to be doing this thing and participating in the tradition that my mother and family and father and grandfather have passed on to me is something that I find comforting right now. Like, I can do this. And one does want the certainty in fantastic times like this of butter, like steaming the pains. Like I do, I want to know that that's going to happen because it makes me feel good to know that I'm going to eat well and that I'm going to be able to keep doing something that I did before and that I'll do after. Yeah. Francis, what are your thoughts?
The 3 words are fantastic and certainty and predictable.
Yeah.
As heroes. Because using fantastic here, a lot of people say fantastic is great, but fantastic is not, it's a larger word than that. We do live right now in fantastic times. And when we are in fantastic times, we long for certainty and predictability. And there's nothing like a meal with the family. And I could see, we ate in the kitchen. We had a little kitchen, and the steam from the potatoes or whatever would make the panes of the windows moist, because usually it was cold or rainy or something outside if you were having fried chicken and mashed potatoes. And butter makes me laugh because we always used margarine unless we had company. But the last part, certain and predictable as heroes in history. And there's a kind of irony there because no matter how history is written, they like to make certain heroes, and you're going to expect to find names of people who are great. But also the irony has to do with those heroes are there, but they're not necessarily the sources of certainty and predictability. And somehow that melting all over, if I let my mind wander, the certainty of cooking, eating in the house. These are not fantastic dishes, comfort foods. And those comfort foods, the certainty and predictability of them is, I think, can dissolve the need for heroes. That makes sense.
It does. It does. And that's what I was going to ask you. Like those 2 lines, the last 2 lines are lines I think about often. What does it mean for the heroes to be melting over everything? I know for me what it means because, I like food. So I know what it means for butter to be melting over everything. Whether it's concern or, knowing that no matter what is happening, that this butter is going to be there melting over everything. And that's what I'll remember. I'm only going to have positive memories connected to this. and even the negative ones, it doesn't matter because this is predictable and it's all good. But with the heroes in history, that line always troubles me. That how are the heroes melting over everything? And perhaps, perhaps, I mean, if I'm thinking personally, from my own history, if you're talking about, like, if you say Lucille Clifton, right? Yeah. If you say Angela Davis, there are certain people, I'm like, yes, they just melt over whatever the horrible circumstances that they came to be in, and we came to know their names are. But that's not all heroes. I don't know that part. I mean, I know I'm being really particular, but there are heroes we know weren't really heroes, but we still give them. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
You're not supposed to not necessarily know. It's the time to say a poem doesn't mean, a poem is.
Mm-hmm.
Or to go back to what you said, poems are not about what you know, but make you wonder.
Yeah, that line makes me wonder.
All of that, many of us can see everything down to that.
Yeah.
And then there's this, oops, what does this mean? And that in and of itself brings the poem to your head as something to eat, something to try to understand, not necessarily understand, but to grow from, to be nourished by.
And to think on, absolutely. And we know that's what Lucille Clifton was known for, her concision and precision. Yeah, so I mean, it's not uncommon that there be one part you're like, wait, but yeah, that line, I have mixed feelings about it. Regardless, I love this poem and I read it twice a week. I'll say that.
So when I read that phrase and heard you read it, I thought actually of the person cooking the food as the hero, especially in the Black culture and family. Like when you think about fried chicken dinners on Sundays, you're usually thinking about a grandma or a mom, and how that person, that figure becomes like this larger than life hero, right? Like in the family. And so I guess I was connecting it to the individual as opposed to historical figures. But related to, I think Frances had said, it's not for us to know. How do you all, are you struck by poems that are accessible? Should folks have to work to figure out the poem? Or should it, speak to us because it's, experience that we're having? So with this poem, Alexis, you're talking about how right now you're finding comfort, and I share in that too, right? In having these regular meals with family. How does accessibility play into how you are finding poems and how others might, as they go and search for poems, think about it?
Yeah. Frances, do you want to go first?
Well, I think let's talk about just 1 minute, because I don't want to go too long and we got more to do. But the idea of poems as being capital P and small p poems. Capital P poems are exclusive. It's a club. You have to learn the game. And once you learn the game, then you can be in it. And it's not written for everybody to understand, but it's something for you to work on and to work with. And small p is popular poetry. That is the poetry that is inclusive. You can get something from it the first reading, and you can get more if you keep going with it or thinking about it or when you hear it read, but it does not exclude people. And what I'm trying to say is that when you there's something magic about poetry, using sound and sense that is not supposed to put you to sleep. It's not supposed to always make you feel comfortable or happy or rewarded just because, but it offers you multiple experiences depending upon who you are and where you're coming from. Lucille Clifton is one of my absolute favorite poets and writers because you can read it and you can see it, and then you realize there's more there. Or at another time, something else pops up. So in terms of accessibility, if all you want is something that's easy to read, it isn't raining rain to me, it's raining daffodils. That can be a lot of fun. And there's not to be scoffed at. It fulfills a particular purpose. But in my head, it's like cotton candy or junk food. Fun, not very nutritious. But anything that I read and I don't know what they're talking about, that makes me mad, and I don't bother to read it again because I think you have asked me to do more than I'm willing to do for you. You got to meet me part way, and then we can work together on this.
Great.
Did I get carried away, or did I answer your question?
No, you answered. You answered. So I think you have our next piece, Frances.
I thought she had it. Instructions on not giving up.
Yeah, that's me.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Do we have time to do it? Because I know I cheated.
Yeah, because we have, it's now 7.
We can skip
Your
over this.
poem.
Or I can just read it quickly because I know we
What
have.
about your poem? The one you wrote?
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
actually looking to Lee on time because I think that we
Okay,
have time.
We have time.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
We're good.
I'll be brief with this one. Instructions on Not Giving Up by Ada Limon. I'll read it and then talk about it. Instructions on Not Giving Up. More than the fuchsia funnels breaking out of the crabapple tree, more than the neighbors' almost obscene display of cherry limbs shoving their cotton candy colored blossoms to the slate sky of spring rains. It's the greening of the trees that really gets to me. When all the shock of white and taffy, the world's baubles and trinkets leave the pavement strewn with confetti of aftermath. The leaves come, patient, plodding, a green skin growing over whatever winter did to us. A return to the strange idea of continuous living despite the mess of us, the hurt, the empty. Fine then, I'll take it, the tree seems to say. A new slick leaf unfurling like a fist to an open palm. I'll take it all. I'll take it all is just bomb, if I'm gonna be honest. That's the last couple words of a poem. But I love Ada Limon's work. She actually has a poem that got popular during the pandemic, but I don't like that one so much. I'm honestly not really vibing with a lot of the pandemic poetry, but that's another conversation. But this particular poem, yeah, I think number one, it's 14 lines. So we get the sonnet again, which literally just means little song translated in Italian. So it's the little 14-line prose poem that just reads down straight through. Not really confusing. She's talking about this tree that is showing it's blossoming. And she's like, there's something more to that because all this is coming after winter. And it continues to live despite the mess of us, the hurt, the empty. And then she's saying that the leaf as it opens wants to take all of that hurt. And there is, for me personally, I like this poem because I do think the last line is amazing. But there is something to me that has cadence about this poem. To me, it is a song of some way, like reminding us to look at nature. Because trees are still blossoming. I mean, I live in California, so I'll say that. Living in San Diego, I know it's a little different from what people are experiencing back home in Philly right now. But the trees are still going, right? Things are still growing. I actually bought 2 plants because of the pandemic. I just wanted to have some reminder of life continuing around me. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful parts of this that I don't want to go too deeply into. I think the texture of the language that she gives us images, right? and cotton candy colored blossoms. I think we all can think of like, what does a cherry blossom look like, right? We've been to DC, we know we seeing the pictures, we know what those even look like. Imagining those all along the sidewalk as we're walking, and our shoes are gonna be covered in them, and we're like, oh man, we don't want to step on them, or you just don't want that on you. You got allergies, you might be a little nervous, but all of this continues. Patient plotting a green skin growing over whatever winter did to us. So there's also a way that it's often the way that we function, I think, with the seasons as well, right? Thinking about how horrible winter was, usually if we're over the snow by a certain time or over the wind or the cold, we're looking forward to spring because we know that brings new life, that brings new energy to us as well. But also what it means that the weather, the world around us, nature seems to open its palm and say, we'll take all the negative and make it right again. So it's also to me a reminder to look around me and see what I can still enjoy, watching how there are parts of the world that are continuing to grow, and it's not all over, it's not all bad. And also a reminder that this won't last forever. I mean, it's that simple for me. I could keep going, but I don't. There's a lot of alliteration. There's beautiful things here, but I'll stop and give Francis a chance to say something.
I was just going to let you go on.
Yeah, I'll stop. I'm nervous about time because I don't want to.
Yeah, I am too, and I want to hear what the questions are and all.
Yeah.
And
So folks have to submit the questions via chat, and so we haven't gotten any yet. We sent a reminder, so if you have a question you want to submit, please do.
T. Floyd, are you out there? You certainly have a question. Dorothy?
So if you want to go to the next piece, we can. I think the order's been changed. So I'm going to guess whose piece it is.
No, let's go on.
I'm just waiting for Lee to switch. Okay, there we go.
Oh, I'm gonna do my reading. Okay, sorry. I was like, oh, there's another piece. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay. Yeah, so I recently, I wrote a poem thinking about the pandemic, and so I'll read it. This is the first time I'm sharing it with everybody. And then I'll talk about it a little bit after. I prefer to let y'all enter it with me. So the title is April 25th, 2020, an untitled elegy. Everyone says the outside is closed. PSAs on hand washing are far from scarce. The lines to get into Trader Joe's wrap around the block. Faces should be covered. Now they must be covered. Running trails and national parks have been dressed in yellow tape under the secrecy of a godforsaken hour. Some work from home because they must. Some go to work because they must. Some look for new places to stay until they get themselves and the kids and the dogs together. And it all is sudden. And it all happening over there and a little over here. And my eyebrows have seen better days. And my Amazon cart is full and empty, then full, then again emptied. And I seem to be saving money. And I seem to better understand why my husband insists on leaving the Tupperware lids off of the Tupperware. And I have TikTok to pass the time. And I take Stubby sea moss twice a day. And I pray like I always pray. And it all seems so seemly. My mother's friend's husband over there knew somebody over there. My sister's roommate's friend over there quarantined herself after a cough over there. Others have died, but mine are smart and safe and inside, where it's always felt safer. Christina Cole, my play auntie, my mother's cousin, who was never for play, only left the house for work until they said to work from home. Smart. She always washed her hands and had her groceries delivered to her and her mother's row home. Smart. She called the doctor as soon as she started coughing. Safe. They tell me she had to lay on her stomach before they placed the ventilator inside. And everyone spoke to her through the phone. She could no longer hold, wondering what was happening inside. And she coded inside. And I'm grieving the loss of my auntie inside. It's because can't none of us go outside to feel what we need to feel inside together. And now the inside is the outside, and the downside and the upside. And it all is sudden. And it all happening over there and over here. And my eyebrows and my mama have seen better days. And my Amazon cart is full and empty, then full, then emptied again. And a tiny row home on Tasker Street is halfway empty. And I have TikTok to pass the time. And I take Sebi CMOS twice a day. And I pray like I always pray, like I need to pray, like I have to pray. And the ER doctors are killing themselves. And it all seems so unseemly now. The frayed edge, the widening tear down the middle of everything. Thank you. That's it. So that piece is emotional. It's getting emotional, but I held it together. I wrote it thinking about how quickly the pandemic showed up at my doorstep. I think for I work in academia, right? I'm a teacher. So it was like, okay, now you're not teaching in classes. First, they gave us the option. Just like, oh, you can just stay at home, right? I was like, great. I don't want to be on campus with all these sick kids, or the idea that we could spread this. We were watching the news and we're listening, and it all just seems like everybody, everything was happening away from me, away from my family, checking in on people, making sure everybody's okay. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, my godmother, I have two because I'm that Black. But one of my godmothers, she got sick, and we all just knew she was going to make it. Like, she wasn't ill, nothing like that. And then we ended up getting the news that she passed, I think, after being in the hospital for only 2 weeks. And it was hard, but of course, the hardest part for me is that I didn't get the chance to be scared. And I think that speaks to what this virus does, right? It suddenly happens, and some people are making it, which is beautiful, but there's a truth that some people aren't, and we also can't grieve them the way we would with family. And so all I have right now are the poems and the ability to write about it. It's hard, but what I try to do, I think, even with the repetition, which you hopefully heard, is returning to the truth that that's not me. It was my godmother, and so that still feels over there, right? I don't feel like I'm in more danger or less danger, but I don't believe that any of us will leave this not knowing someone who was affected, whether they survived it or not. And that says something to what the experience of this virus for us here in America, I think, has been. That it came, it showed up, and then all of a sudden we had to do certain things and live differently, and we're trying to be safe. But then as the numbers increase and people's exposure increases, we're losing more and more people. And so we're not going to leave this. It wasn't, I don't believe any of us will be able to say we just sat and we didn't know anybody. It felt like it was happening over there. I think it shows up for us over here. I mean, it even started over there, right? You think, oh, Italy and China, and then it's here. So how that affects us individually and what it means for us to even mourn and experience emotions we would usually experience. Yeah, that's all I really have. It's brand new. It's new. But it's how it's been. It's a poem that helped me in the moment to get it out. I'll revisit it and edit it in the future. Right now, it's a little hard. But yeah, that's what I have.
And I think that this is an answer to the question that was the title of the session. In times like these, we need a poem with the idea of doing. And what I see is not only does this woman, who I have never met face to face and who is much younger than I am, speaks gives voice to feelings that I have. It's a kind of a magic, scary, awful thing to hear the words and to see how the words build and move me in ways that I cannot have anticipated. And it's brave, it's so brave, because some people are blessed to write poetry and others of us are blessed to sing it, to hear it, to work with it. And I just think this is a very helpful and wonderful thing that you give to us, Alexis. And yeah, I can't articulate it right now because it has moved the emotions and my head is bursting with all of these things that are real about these days. But this is what poetry is. And this is one reason why poetry is a tool and a escape and a blessing for us in times particularly that are fantastic.
Yeah, and I do want to say too, I'm speaking to that, I did not know at all what I was going to write. I sat down and said I have to write something, and I think there's all that people often will ask about process for poets when it comes to certain things. I think if you study your craft and perfect it, you have all of that inside of you. So the cadence, the line breaks, all of that, it works and it comes when you actually sit down to try to, well, to use language to attempt to communicate your wonder, your own wonder at what it is that's happening. And so that's what happened for me. And I definitely needed a poem right now for what's happening.
Thank you for sharing that. So we have a couple of questions. One for Alexis. How long did it take you to write this poem?
Oh yeah, like I said, this is new. I probably sat down and wrote it in about 20 minutes. I usually will, when I'm trying to actively write, I'll write for maybe an hour and then come back to it a week later and then revise. But yeah, this probably took about 20 minutes. I think it's also this particular poem, I had a lot, and I still do have a lot of, honestly, I'm bursting with whatever all is happening inside of me. Terrified, I know in some ways, very frustrated. And I also just don't have access to the people who loved her. Sorry. Yeah, I don't have access to the people who loved her right now in the way that we would be able to comfort one another. And so there's all of that and what comes out in words. So I think it was a fast, I don't always write that quickly, but I think I just needed to get something out. So
Thank you.
yeah.
And then question for Francis. This is from Marquetta. Dr. Foster, given your love of poetry, what would compel you to perhaps write one?
Because I love poetry, I will not insult it. I sometimes write, it comes out. And whether it's a poem or not, I don't know.
Mm.
But the line between what isn't prose is poetry and what isn't poetry is prose. And sometimes you can't tell the difference. So sometimes it has to come out and I will write something that somebody says that's a poem. But what compels me, I don't know. What compels Marquetta to sing and to give and to be so generous? She said once, I'm not that good a singer, but I have passion. And I think that came into my head when I thought about it. Passion will compel me to try to make real in words something that's trying to become real in words. It might be a poem, it might not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you share these non-poems? I'm curious. You share the non-poems, these poems that aren't poems, your prose or whatever comes out? Are you sharing them at all?
Occasionally,
Yeah.
mostly not.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
And then our last question before we move to the prompt, there was interest from folks about the change in voice throughout the pieces, from I to we to us. Yeah, do you want to speak on that?
All the pieces we read tonight?
Yeah, is it? I think it's unclear if it's all the
Interesting.
pieces or was the last piece not clear. I don't know if there was additional detail. I can't see all the questions, so Lee is sharing them. We're not sure. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so this was a question from Heather, and I'll read her response in full. It says, I don't have a question, but I was interested in hearing about the change in voice throughout the poems, from I to we to us. I have wonderings as I am synthesizing what I am hearing and what I'm reading.
Yeah.
Part of it might be the coincidence of theme, which had to do with, and the way I interpret it was, in times like these, we need a poem. And so I was sharing poems that are relevant to me at this time. And those kinds of poems tend to be hopefully resurrection poems or philosophical poems. And so the voice of the we and the I and the you are I think the only voices that really work well. When you get to the third person, the distancing comes apart. The distancing works against the immediacy of a pandemic or that kind of thing. Not necessarily, because I can think of Yeats and some others who do well enough, but I think we're more in an Emily Dickinson time right now.
Okay, thank you. So we're gonna move to the prompt, and I will let Alexis explain that.
Yeah, so for those of you who are interested, inspired by this evening, or interested in trying your hand in your spare time at writing a poem, this is a prompt that would encourage you to write a sonnet. I briefly said what that was. Again, sonnet referring to a little poem. Usually there's a lot of tight constraints on meter and rhyme. Don't worry about those. You're just gonna write 14 lines, whether they rhyme or not. Do the first 7 lines, something that happened each day of last week. I know sometimes the days can blur together right now. So I think it also is an exercise in remembering the distinct days. And then the other 7 lines, a pre-COVID-19 memory from any point in history, your own personal history, your own cultural history, world history, national history, et cetera. So 7 lines, something that happened each day of last week. And it works out because 14 lines for a poem. Think about two different sets of memory. And then 7 lines before shelter in place. And then this is just a little poety thing. You don't have to if it doesn't come, but it might help. Include the words glow, blue, fissure, and tissue. I'm a sucker for sibilance. Sibilance is just basically the use of like the S sound. Anytime I think it's defined as anytime your tongue touches the back of your teeth to make a noise. So like all those. But usually it makes the poem hiss, so it can make a poem seem more sensual or more ominous. And so sometimes we'll be reading a poem and we think, oh, this should have been a really happy poem, but I had a feeling that it was like creepy. It's because they put a lot of S's in it. So look for that. That's some little nerdy thing you can do. But yeah, so I put 2 sibilancy words in there. Play with it, alternate lines. You don't have to keep it the first 7 and the last 7. You can switch it up. But I think you all will be surprised at what comes out. And I'm sure you all write beautiful poems. And if you can share it, please do. I think we all need a poem right now.
Thank you. And San Diego, the city of San Diego has a Poetry Together Challenge going on. I don't know how many folks know that we have a poet laureate for the city of San Diego, and he is inviting people to submit original pieces of work. And I put a link in the chat if you're interested to go and submit and read more about the guidelines and rules, and pieces will be chosen to be publicly shared on the website, I believe. So check that out. You have a prompt here that can help guide you. And hopefully you have some new poems and poets that you can turn to. I think, you know, as Francis and Alexis have shared, poems can be just for you, or you can share it with a friend or family member that might need to be uplifted. So we have some new resources to go to, or some old ones that we were so thank you so much, Francis and Alexis, for sharing your time and talent with us. We are blessed by this experience, and I will turn it back over to the Reverend Dr. Jaylee Hill.
So I just want to say it has been a joy to be able to keep space in here with you, and to be in the presence of all of you, and to hear ways that we might think about navigating these difficult times together. And so, Christie, I'm grateful for your gift of moderating and moving us in this conversation, and Alexis and Francis for your gift of poetry and excellence in helping us to think about this stuff, or not at all think about it, but to allow the poems to just kind of wash over us and become what they need to be for us in this moment. I am deeply, deeply grateful. Just to let you know, all of the poems that we have, some folks are asking for copies of the poems. I don't know if copies are available, but at least you can go to the YouTube page and you can be able to kind of have this experience again and listen to them being read again, and see them in those spaces there. But we are truly, truly, truly grateful for this unique gift that has been given to us in this space and time, and pray that it has been a tremendous blessing and bit of encouragement for you on a Thursday afternoon, or Thursday evening for some, and a Thursday late at night for others that are on the East Coast that are joining us. Just want to make you aware of just a few other digital gatherings that we have, and things that are happening in the life of our community. Again, this is going to be on our, it's being streamed to our YouTube page, and so it's available there. But also on our website is a breathing and relaxation meditation that Dr. Rita Montero has led for us. And so you're able to go to that site and just spend some time in that space of breathing and experiencing that kind of centering work that allows us to relax in our spaces and to know that things are working out for the good. And then on this Sunday, we invite you to join us for our worship, for our Sunday school, as well as our worship service. We won't have communion this Sunday, but our morning worship service this coming Sunday. So we want to thank you so much for joining us today and being a part of what we have done and shared in the space together, and bid you a wonderful evening and a joyous, joyous day.